The Oklahoma legislature will meet in special session beginning next Monday, November 15th, to address the state's plans for redistricting based on the results of the 2020 census. What will the new maps look like for Oklahoma voters? That's the topic of our weekly in-depth segment with moderator Susan Cadeau and her guests.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, this will probably be an ongoing issue for Oklahomans and for our lawmakers to wrangle with in the coming months, in the coming year. And I'd like to introduce our panel of guests who are here to help us begin to sort all of this out. First, we have Representative Emily Virgin. She's a Democrat from Norman and co-vice chair of the House Committee for State and Federal Redistricting. We also have Annie Moore, who is the executive director of People, Not Politicians, which is an anti-gerrymandering organization. And we have Trevor Brown, government issues reporter for our content partners at Oklahoma Watch. Thank you all very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin with our representative, Representative Virgin. 2020's census became something of a controversial topic as then President Trump wanted to cut the census taking short. Oklahoma said that the numbers, though, were solid for our state. How much confidence do lawmakers have and do you have in those numbers from the latest census?
Well, I think we have a great deal of confidence because the time was lengthened. So any issues that were created by the pandemic or that the Trump administration created by undercounting, I think that we have seen a correction in that with the lengthening of time that census data was collected.
Thank you. Andy, I want to come to you next. Now, those numbers showed a 5.5% growth. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's about 200,000 people. Where have those people landed in Oklahoma?
Yeah. So 200,000 people statewide are new, but we've seen a big shift in where those new people have moved and where people within the state moved over the last 10 years, away from rural areas and towards the metropolitan centers, the urban areas of Oklahoma City and Tulsa in particular, and the surrounding suburbs.
Trevor, I want to come to you. This year's redistricting is happening in a special session called by the governor rather than doing it during a normal session. Why is that?
So there's a delay in the Census Bureau actually delivering the data to the state. The Census Bureau had to take us more time than expected. Ideally, they would have liked to wrap this up during the regular session that ended in May, but they didn't have the data. They had some data for the state legislative maps, but not the congressional maps. So that's what they'll be returning to do.
And as the final step in laying this foundation for our viewers to understand where we are, Representative, I'd like to come to you. Where are we in the process? There are several steps in the redistricting process, correct?
Yes, there are many steps, but really all that's laid out in statute and in the Constitution is that the legislature must redraw the districts every 10 years. So any other steps are imposed by the legislature itself. And so the steps that we've laid out include town halls, they include public map submissions, and some committee meetings as well. And we have a pretty good base for where we're at on the legislative districts, but with the congressional districts, we're having this conversation for the first time.
Andy, is there any controversy with what's coming up so far?
Oh, yeah.
For congressional districts?
Yeah, most definitely. To Representative Virgin's point, the legislature held 25 town hall meetings, some in person and a few virtual, as they prepared to draw the state legislative districts. However, they only held five or six town hall meetings for the congressional redistricting, even though there's only 5 congressional districts and each of those spans, tens of thousands of square miles. And the map that we've seen that they released last week and they'll be voting on next week is exactly what you'd expect when politicians are in charge of drawing their own districts. It's a map that reflects not the public's best interests, but incumbent politicians' best interests, that being getting reelected.
Trevor, I want to ask you, you've been looking at this a lot. Why are Republicans, well, they say there's not much change. I think others say there is. You sort it out for me.
Yeah, so the big district that we're looking at is Congressional District 5. That covers Oklahoma County and some of the surrounding counties and areas. This is really the only competitive congressional race in the past really decade. Democrat Kendra Horn won it in 2018, and now Stephanie Bice, who claimed it in 2020, is the representative there. But as the Oklahoma City area has grown, it's also becoming more of a purple area. It's kind of a toss-up. It's been a lot of national sites, races to watch. We're looking at a razor thin, possibly U.S. House, margin with the toss-up between Republicans and Democrats. And this one could go either way, but Republicans have strengthened their position in the proposed map that was released recently. And that's going to make it really hard for Democrats to claim it once again.
So we have this map. I was showing you guys all my maps I had printed off earlier, and I know we have a map to show everyone. But what's the change in the 5th Congressional District that might be a little troubling for some?
There are quite a few changes. I think that most folks who are looking at this independently would see that there have been some pretty drastic changes to the 5th District. And I think the biggest issue for us is in the southwest portion of Oklahoma County. And that means that areas like South Oklahoma City, Capitol Hill area, those are being shoved into the 3rd Congressional District. And what that does is essentially make the 5th District less competitive. But so that's from a political standpoint. But just for those folks who live in those areas, that the southwest portion of Oklahoma County, and then it creeps up to some northern portions as well, the Plaza District being one of those notable areas being put into the same congressional district as the Panhandle. What folks who live there are saying is that makes no sense.
Andy, I want to read a quote from Oklahoma Watch. State Senator Julie Daniels, a Republican from Bartlesville, is quoted as expressing similar concerns to what we just heard from the representative. She says her argument would be against 3 districts touching Oklahoma County, and the reason is that you can end up with 4 urban Congress people and only 1 representing rural Oklahoma. Does that kind of gel with how you feel? Andy?
Yeah, these maps are not good for people who live in Oklahoma City or people who live in rural areas. The contrast would be the 1st district, the district by Tulsa, which the legislature has made more compact, and that district makes a lot of sense. But here in the 5th district, they made it much larger than it has been. And in fact, you could draw the 5th district with just one single county. It could be contained within Oklahoma County by itself. In fact, the map that my organization, that I submitted to the legislature, did just that. We drew it with just people who live in Oklahoma County. And that is arguably the most compact and most common sense district you could have in the entire country. That portion of Oklahoma County, the southwest portion of Oklahoma City, that has been proposed by the legislature to move into the 3rd district is almost entirely Latino. It is, in fact, it includes half of the Latino or the Hispanic community in Oklahoma County. And so to cut the Hispanic community in half, simply to score a few political points, is, regardless of your party affiliation, it's the wrong thing to do.
Trevor, I want to ask you, I held up one map. I have several. How many maps have come into play on this? And why has this one become the prevailing map thus far?
Yeah, so in this process, the legislature did something new in allowing the public to submit their own maps. There's a program called Dave's Redistricting app that pretty much allowed you to kind of just play around and make your own maps. It was not that hard to do. Groups like Andy's submitted their map. I think there was 9 other people around the state that submitted maps. The map that we see now is the official proposal from the Redistricting Committee, which is Republican led, even though there's co-chairs such as the representative here. Republicans are in the driving seat in this. They have, super majorities in the House and Senate, and then Governor Stitt, a Republican, as the governor. They're going to have to say. So this is the map that they will be looking at when they return to the special session next week. It's possible there could be amendments, changes. I wouldn't hold my breath on that personally. We're probably going to see that map be the map that's voted on ultimately.
Representative, when all the maps come in, who sees those maps and who decides what's moving forward? For everyone out there who's wondering how this works, who's doing it?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially here, to distinguish between the process of the legislative districts, our state legislative districts in the House and the Senate, and the congressional districts that we've been talking about mostly here in this discussion. In the legislative districts, we had a pretty comprehensive process that involved committees that were made up of legislators from each region, and there were several meetings held with those legislators. And then, as Andy mentioned, many town halls. And I think that I have a higher degree of confidence, and the public probably has a higher degree of confidence in that process, as imperfect as it was. But with the congressional districts, what we saw was really none of that. We saw a few town halls, we saw a few public comments and some map submissions, but the first time that I, as a co-vice chair of the redistricting committee, saw these maps was when they were released to the general public.
They give the maps to, Representative said she didn't see them until the public saw them. Who's releasing the maps? Who gives the representatives the maps? Who's responsible for that?
If you go back and watch the early committee meetings back at the beginning of session in February of this year, you'll see discussion about the rules and who has access to the offices where the maps are held. We know that the staff behind it are the ones that are drawing the maps. Leadership undoubtedly has input in that. We know that current sitting congressional representatives have input in that, but not most Oklahomans and not even all members of the legislature. Now, I'll say we've seen the same kind of gerrymandering by Democrats in other states. The map in Illinois is an egregious example of gerrymandering up there. Gerrymandering is not just a partisan issue, it is a power issue. Whichever party is in power will do it. And that's why we need to change the system in Oklahoma.
Okay, so this leads me to every answer you guys give leads me to several more questions. So Trevor, I'm going to come to you on Andy brought up gerrymandering. First, I'd like you to explain for our viewers what gerrymandering is in case anyone doesn't know. And second, doesn't Oklahoma have laws to prevent gerrymandering?
So gerrymandering basically is just rewriting a map unfairly, giving one party power or more power over another one. Now, there's nothing inherently illegal about, there's no law saying you can't gerrymander. That means that it's pretty much up to the politicians, like Andy said, to rewrite the rules. I'm sure he can speak to it more, but there's a number of states that have developed independent redistricting panels to avoid this, where there's Republicans and Democrats. Here, like in many other states, it's just the party that's in power. 20 years ago, that would have been the Democrats. Now it's Republicans.
And is this by definition then gerrymandering? And I'll let anyone answer that question.
I'll say, yes, this is gerrymandering. Drawing maps for political purposes is the definition of gerrymandering. And, I don't think anyone else has said it, but the person in the Senate staff that's responsible for drawing the maps is a former chief of staff to Todd Lamb when he was lieutenant governor and was his campaign manager, I believe, when he ran for governor. And then, we've seen a Republican consultant. We've seen the former political director for the state Republican Party submit maps. Undoubtedly, people that are connected to the members of the legislature and the members of Congress that are in power. One person who submitted a map is a business partner with a current member of Congress. These are not just regular everyday Oklahomans who are submitting maps. This is people that have been recruited or have ties to those in power that have been recruited or asked to submit maps.
Representative, I'm going to give you the last word. When it comes to redistricting, what would you like to see happen this year, or if it's too late this year, 10 years from now when all of this goes round again?
Well, it's really not too late this year. What needs to happen this year is for Oklahomans to contact their members of the legislature in the House and the Senate and let them know how they feel about these maps, because we'll be voting on them next week, but that vote is not final by any means. We can still redraw these maps in a more fair and open process. In the next 10 years, though, I think that what we've seen this year and what we've seen when Democrats were in charge in the legislature was all the case you need to prove that independent redistricting is what we need in this state. Because frankly, politicians can't be trusted to take their self-interest out of the process.
Wonderful. I'd like to thank all three of you for this wonderful information and for your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.